Welcome to the A Minute to Midnight Show, folks. My name is Tony, and today I want to offer a very warm welcome to the A Minute to Midnight Show to Gary, who is one of our moderators on the A Minute to Midnight Facebook group, and also Fred from the ETPrepper YouTube channel. We've had Fred on the show a couple of times before, but Gary, this is the first time we've had you on the show, so it's great to have you on.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. It's good to be here. Hello, Fred. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm ready to go. I'm glad I'm here, and I hope we can help a bunch of people with this.
Absolutely.
I asked you guys, if we could do this, because I was thinking, man, there's just so many potential things at the moment why we need to be prepared. And I'm just thinking, even there was, a series of 6+ earthquakes off Vancouver Island yesterday, which, potentially is that going to trigger something more? Who knows? But it's earthquakes, and then we've got talk about economic possible crash coming, and there's always so many reasons why people need to be prepared. And of course, number one reason for disasters and disaster preparedness is flooding, which I think accounts for about 43% or something of all natural disasters in the world. So there's a lot of reasons to do this. So it's great to have you guys on the show today.
Well, it's great to be here.
Tony.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll go to you first there, Gary, since you're new. Perhaps you could give our listeners a little bit of an idea about your background.
Sure. Currently I live in the country, so to speak, of Georgia. I originally moved up here. Well, I moved up here about 5 years ago, but I'd say it was about 10 years ago when I was really totally unprepared. And I've always had a little bit of a prepared mindset because I grew up in South Florida. I was used to hurricanes. I lived in Hurricane Alley, as they like to call it. And but the reality was I only had maybe a handful of, the box of items, some tuna fish and a crank radio and some batteries and a flashlight. But as far as any real preparedness, so to speak, for anything that was really significant, I wasn't really wasn't set up for it. And the reality with me, or at least at the time, was that, we were in election time. We were having a new president come in, and there was just a lot of concerns floating around. And I just realized that if something were to happen, if there was an economic collapse, some type of natural disaster, a coronal mass ejection, a sun ejection, or even an EMP or something like that, I just realized that I wasn't set up for it at all. I mean, as a father of 3 and a grandfather, I realized that I just needed to do something about it. And the first thing I did was I prayed about it. Because it really was strong on my mind, and I really wanted to make sure that that I went to the Lord with it. And as a Christian, I try to. I'm not always good at that on some of the smaller things, but certainly on the bigger things. And I try to do that in everything now. But I prayed about it, and I was just led to learn about being better prepared, and that's kind of where I started. And I mentioned at the beginning of this that I moved to the country. Well, I was still working at the time when I was living really closer to a major city in Georgia. That's Atlanta. And I just realized I didn't like being that close to a major city with 4.5 million people. If all of a sudden, the power grid goes down or something to that nature, and that there were millions of hungry people, And so anyway, I talked to my wife, and for multiple reasons, we had a daughter going off to college, and I had a house in the suburbs. We didn't need it any longer, and so we started looking further out, and we bought a piece of property. And 5 years ago, I started turning it into like a little homestead, just to be better prepared. better in a self-sustaining type of lifestyle.
And of course, you're in one part of this United States. I'm in New Zealand. And Fred, you're somewhere else completely different with a different climate altogether in the United States. Maybe you can tell us how it ended up that you come to be where you are now.
Well, first, Gary did it right. He prayed first and then got God's leading. Me, I started back in Y2K as far as prepping goes. And I was in a suburb in a nice house and stuff. And then I prepared knowing that, I doubted if it was going to like be a societal crash, but just probably be an upset. And so I prepared for that. And it wasn't even an upset. And it worked out pretty good because we bought a lot of high density foods. And the price of them went up quite a bit, actually, right around then. And so we ended up saving a lot of money by prepping. And then as time went on, that urgency kind of went away. And then later on, it came back again. And so I picked back up on the prepping out of fear. That's not so good. And then later from then, probably about eight or 9 years ago, I realized, wait a minute, why am I doing this? Am I afraid? I'm a child of the King. I shouldn't be afraid. I'm a Christian. And so as a result of that, I gave it a good amount of prayer and thinking and, just kind of reassessed where I was at. And the sense that I got, and it's a growing sense. It's not like a waning sense. It's as my kids would say, it's getting worse. Not really. I talk a lot about it because it's on my mind quite a bit. And it's the preparation, not just for me, not just for my family, but who else will God bring our way? And so if we're ready with supplies and who knows what, then when God's probably not going to bring anybody by you if you have nothing. But if you have something and you purposely prepare, in a way that you've got extra where they can be served by that, people that are really hungry are going to listen real close to, witnessing and so forth. And those days are coming. Those if you read your Bible, those days are coming. It's not, if, it's when. And, you touched on the economic collapse. Really, I think that one's probably going to come first. But as I read and think this thing through, and I think once the kickoff event happens, everything's going to start snowballing and things are just going to like the dominoes falling, and they're going to fall faster and faster. We've already seen that with the natural events. If you Google the amount of earthquakes that we've had, a certain threshold of earthquake, in other words, not just any old earthquake, but a certain threshold, like I don't remember what number on the Richter scale, like 2 or 1.5 or something, where they call it, it makes it into this database. It's going up logarithmically. It's crazy the amount of earthquakes that make it into this database. So, there's the earth is moaning and groaning and getting ready for the end or the big change. So anyway, we should as well get ready for that. And so that's what the conclusion I came to after prayer, and that the Lord wants me to be doing this. And so I took a major step this last about a year ago, and that was to move out here in New Mexico. I'm in the desert, the high desert. So it's not super hot. When you say desert, you think, oh my gosh, it's 110 degrees. No, we don't even get over 100 degrees up here. Plus, it's dry heat, so it's actually pretty comfortable. But a friend of mine once told me, he says, you know what? Thrive where it's hard to live, and you're going to be in the best shape. and you'll be in the best shape to help others. And it's like, wow, that's, if you think about that, if you can thrive where it's hard, then, your peril will be a lot less. You'll have a lot less unwanted visitors. Like everybody says, I'm going to go to I'm going to hike up to the mountains. Well, gee whiz, I've heard that like by most people. The mountains are going to be a busy place. So out here in the desert, it's probably not going to be so busy.
So I got a couple of things that come to my mind there is firstly, okay, well, they reckon that a minimum of water that you want to have is 1 gallon per person per day. And so, that's to have stored or whatever. And even that can be used up pretty quickly. So being in the desert, that could be, obviously water's an issue. And then the other thing that came to my mind is something talking with you, Gary, and Fred was talking about helping people, and I totally agree with that. But then there's the other side of that. I think we probably all heard the people that say, oh, well, I know where to come when disaster strikes. It's like people that don't do anything to prepare themselves, and so then they go, oh, I know that such and such has got all that preparedness stuff. So then you could end up swamped into the point where you can be prepared, but you're never going to be able to cope with masses of people. So, yeah, Gary.
Yeah, well, I was going to say it's a good segue into one thing I wanted to mention before I give you my thoughts on that. That very topic is brought up in a book. In fact, it was. Well, let me even step back a little bit further for a second. I'm sure there's some folks that are listening to this or have thought about preparedness in general that have not done anything yet, and I've been in those shoes, and it can seem very overwhelming. Where do I start? How do I start? I don't really have a budget for this, or I don't have much of a budget for this. And the advice that I would give in that regard would be to just start small. And in fact, there's not necessarily a saying, but it's I think in terms of threes, have enough to last you 3 days, and that would be, those basic necessities: water, food, some medical items or whatever. And then when you have enough for 3 days, water and food and then think in terms of like maybe 3 weeks. And then if you get past that, then maybe 3 months. And so everybody has to make that decision for themselves. And of course that also you have to take into account the size of your family. But when I started out, I had that overwhelming feeling, because all of a sudden I just realized I didn't really have hardly anything. And at that time already, a lot of things were starting to crank up in alternative media about, possible inflation, possible deflation, possible stagflation, all these things. And I said, wow, if this happened tomorrow, where would I be? So I felt this kind of panic set in initially. And so I got on, like most of us do, we get on the internet and we start typing in keywords. And I did stumble onto a book that I do really highly recommend. First book you should have, if you don't already, is your Bible. But I would call this the Bible of just general preparedness. And this gentleman, he's a former naval intelligence officer. He's now he's an author and speaker, and I'm sure some of the folks on here have heard of him. He has the survivalblog.com, but it's James Wesley Rawls. And that book, in fact, thinking about this interview, this podcast, mine's sitting on the shelf over here. It was written in 2009, and that was about the time I bought it. I think I may have gotten it in 2010, but I highly recommend it. It's on Amazon. It's called The End of the World as We Know It. The End of the World as We Know It by James Wesley Rawls. And he's a Christian, by the way. And that leads into, I kind of gave you a very long lead in here, but he talks about this very thing about Christian charity, because he is a Christian. And as he says, and we've already kind of mentioned this, the number one prep is your spiritual, your spiritual, in that relationship being with our Lord, with God through Jesus Christ, his son. That's the number one prep. But he's beyond that. There is a concern, and this guy is very much about security. I think he doesn't even say exactly where he lives, but he may be somewhere in your neighborhood, Fred. But he's somewhere, I think, in the Midwest. And he talks about when those people show up at your door, that can be a very scary security risk, especially if you don't know the person. But if they're coming up, that's where you have to have those conversations, maybe with your pastor, with your church, if you belong to one, about them being locations where donations can be made to where that would be kind of like call it a centralized location for those necessary handouts. I don't know honestly how well that would work, but it would be somewhere that you could send someone in the event they're banging on your door, and because once again, it could set yourself and your family up for some dire circumstances, because it would concern me greatly of what we've all seen riots. We've all seen things that go on in the news. We've all seen when things break down just for hours, never mind an extended period of time. And many, many, many people, the large majority of people, are not prepared. They don't have enough in their refrigerator or their cupboards to get them more than a few days, probably. Grocery stores will empty out in hours, not days. He lays all this out very succinctly in that book, too, by the way. The Christian approach to this, about preparing, and the reasoning of why one should be prepared and have the right mindset. So it's a very good book.
Yeah, and I think the reality is that if you've got 3 months worth of food prepared, just say somebody's done that, and you have a bunch of people show up, well, that 3 months worth of food could be, you've maybe spent years accumulating it, and then somebody comes along, or a bunch of people come along, and it lasts 2-3 days instead of that. So it's kind of, I don't know, none of us wants to hunker down and bunker down and be isolationist. So it's kind of a difficult one to address in some ways. So Fred, you've taken the approach of being out further away from people. Have you got any more thoughts on this?
Yeah, what Gary said was a great point about having a centralized location away from where we live. I have a lot of land and so forth. I've got 30 acres, and it's right next to the BLM land, which is like I got an extra million on top of that. But so I'm okay. I'm kind of out there. My closest neighbor is probably over a mile from as the crow flies, and so yeah, that's good. But that there's also, it's not so good, because there's a security issue, and then one thing is my dad was in the Navy. One of the things he said is, loose lips sink ships. And that was way back when. And if you are, proud of what you've done, and you've prepared, and you've got a good stockpile of this, that, or the other thing, and, you get your friends coming over, and you've got some acquaintances coming over, and you kind of get comfortable, and you're yapping away, and, oh yeah, check this out. I got a whole closet full of this, that, and the other thing. Well, where, if the chips are down, everybody that you just talked to is coming over. And so that is a very serious thing to do. I mean, it's, right now everything's easy, but when the chips are down, it's not going to be, I forget the verse in Proverbs, but a man will transgress for a slice of bread. If people are hungry enough, they're going to be desperate. And so, we want to help people, and it'd be wise to do it from a remote location. And I don't know how that looks like, what that looks like, but that there's that facet of my preparations. Another thing I'm doing is I'm collecting campers, and I've got one. Actually, I've got two, but my goal is to have at least three, and set up a little I want to say commune, but just a place where I can have families come over and they've got a safe place to be. I've got friends that are close to the city, and if stuff happens and they got to get out, I let them know that, hey, look, you can come here. There's a door open here for you. So, and that's what I'd like to do for my property is have like-minded friends here, because one of the things about preparations is community. Is I'm out in the middle of nowhere. I've been here for a year. My wife has cancer, so I've got a real challenge. She can't go out of the house, so she's not meditating. So this great idea I've had to move out here. So far, so good, but we just haven't been socially involved because of her illness. And so as a result of that, I'm not where I want to be in a community standpoint of view. And that is a kind of a big deal. If stuff comes down like the economy, and we can talk about that in a second too.
And I think the reaction some people always have is, oh, well, I'm just going to trust God and I'm not doing anything to prepare. And listening to this, they could go, oh, what's the point anyway, because someone's going to steal it all, or the government will come and take it away and so on. But I think this is where it's important that each individual prays about it instead of coming up with that sort of scenario and go, well, God, what do you want me to do? And if you actually listen to what God's saying to an individual, because the reality is that everyone still needs to eat and do all these things. So the food and whatnot's got to come from somewhere. And if people are doing something to prepare themselves, they've got a far better chance of surviving anything than if they do nothing.
Oh, absolutely. And something I just wanted to piggyback off of real quickly is what Fred talked about with community. It's really vitally important. And this is also difficult because it becomes really a trust factor. But one of the things that I've done here where I live is in the 5 years I've lived here, and I retired not too long ago, so I have more time on my hands than I used to. But where I live, everyone's on acreage. So even though I'm not definitely not as isolated as Fred is, I mean I can see properties near me and homes and things, but I've tried to do my best to get to know some of the folks around here, and I've also volunteered with my county. There's I don't know, folks listening to this, if you're familiar with CERT, but it's called the Community Emergency Restoration Teams. That kind of lends itself to people with like minds, meaning they're looking. In these CERT communities, you go through a class and then you get certified. It's really not difficult at all. But it's about volunteering with your county, and if something, there's an emergency situation, to be able to help out. But there's skill training, and you're meeting. I've already met multiple people that as I've gotten to know them better, have comparable or like mindsets, and a lot of them, because they are volunteers. I'm not saying every one of them is a Christian. But most of them are the ones I've met. Most of them believe in doing some self-sustaining, or they have a farm or a homestead or something like that. And even if they don't, they have that like mindset. So there's groups like that. If there are around you, I recommend exploring them. It's kind of like that gentle, safe way of getting to know people, and then as you get to know them better, then you can start delving further into relationships. And maybe, because I'll tell you one thing that I don't think anybody, if it came down to once again the worst case scenario happens, and I think a lot of us certainly on here on this call, and as well as in the community of listeners, I think a lot of folks that are listening to this probably have like mindsets. They wouldn't be on A Minute to Midnight if they didn't. They know what the Bible says about what's coming. There's a good argument that it's in our lifetime, and it could be at any time. then they want to meet people in a safe environment, but you do have to go about it not shouting it from the rooftops. You need to go about it methodically, I guess you could say, in a safe way, and through maybe meeting your neighbors, through organizations, things of that nature, and that goes a long way.
Okay, so what about guys? What about people that can't get out of the city, out of the big cities, or they're tied to their jobs and different things, or they don't have the money, to be able to do it. I'm sure there's a lot of people who go, yeah, I'd love to be able to do what you guys have done, but we can't. So what about those people?
There's a lot of different avenues we can go down as far as trying to prepare. If you decide you're going to prepare, you can. Any one of us can start somewhere. I am back in the day, I had lots of money, and you know what? I still went to Goodwill, and so some of the preps were easy for me. I just ordered, and no big deal. And now it's a different world. I've gone bankrupt, so it's like God was trying to, hey, I need to talk to you. I need to talk to you. Yeah, I got it. And then finally he says, okay, I know where you listen. Let me take your wallet.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's all gone. So it's a little more challenging nowadays from the way it used to be. So I still go to Goodwill or a resale shop or a garage sale. If you get in mind what I'm getting at is, a lot of people, they're going to give you excuses. They may have a lot of money. Oh, I don't have the money to do that. I don't have. Well, they aren't interested. But the person that is really, this is a concern, but they just don't know where to start. I think you mentioned it, Gary, or maybe when we were talking before. You start small. You start a little bit at a time, and like you were saying, I know on the recording here, you said start with three days. Most of us already have 3 days worth of preps, right? Open your refrigerator or your cabinet. You probably got some. So you got to start. So that's encouraging, I hope. But and when you go to the store, you get an extra can of beans, or you get an extra can of corn or whatever. I'm starting to go back to canned stuff now, because by the way, most of the food that I eat is expired because it's just been in storage for a while, and hey, I'm eating it, it's fine. But grab an extra can of corn or extra can of this or that, or bag of rice or a bag of beans. The quickest, easiest way to get a good amount of food supply is rice and beans. Some people will diss that and say, oh, you can't, but really you need calories. If you start with that, and you can get a good bunch of rice and beans, and hey, now you got 2 weeks worth of food. And that's just for one person or two. And if you're an apartment in the city, there are other avenues. You can actually grow your own food. I read an article one time. I was doing a lot of research. It's called barrel gardening, and what they do, or bucket gardening, and what they do. This one guy actually had a surplus of food that he was growing in his apartment, and he brought barrels up, brought dirt up, filled them up, and then he was growing all sorts of stuff in the barrels in his apartment. So if there's a will, there's a way. That's kind of the point here. And there's all sorts of ideas, and there's all sorts of guys that would love to share the ideas. And you know what? A lot of us have already made videos and put them on YouTube. I just made a generator video that I shared, and it's kind of cool because it's not really a generator. All it is 2 batteries and an inverter. But now I don't have a fuel to buy. I just have to have electricity to charge the batteries, and that's done with a little solar panel. So, I mean, we've got ideas, and we've got, people just constantly are thinking and figuring out life hacks and this, that, and the other thing, and how to do this. And I hope that this video spurs on some thinking and is encouraging to people to, if you haven't got started, get started. And it's not that hard to start, to get, where we are. We've been doing this for years, and we've been kind of committed to it for years. And after a person starts and is committed to it, not going crazy with it and not turning it into an idol.
No, it should not be an obsession.
Tagline.
It should not be an obsession.
Right. I've got a tagline on one of my videos that I put on the end of some of my videos, and it says, "Prep to live, don't live to prep." And the point being is, it can kind of, if you get excited about it and you're thinking about it all the time, it can kind of take you over, and you got to keep that in check and keep things in balance. And it's good to have a good balanced approach. There is Mike from On Point Preparedness has a real good video out there about prepping 101. So if you search on YouTube prepping 101 On Point Preparedness, you'll find his video, and it'll give a great synopsis on how to get started and that kind of thing. And it's pretty well laid out. I have a bunch of ideas I want to share, but anyway, I'll turn it over to Gary.
Well, yeah, Fred, I was just going to say you've kind of on the aspect of not being obsessed and things like that. I will acknowledge that probably, and I don't think I was ever, quote, obsessed, but when I first started out, I did feel a sense of that panic, not only not knowing what to do, where to start, the financial aspect of it, because there was a lot I wanted to do quickly in case, something was going to happen in a short period of time. And of course, that was 10 years ago. But it's amazing how I've changed my thinking in some regards, is that what I've taken, in other words, preparedness should be seen also as like kind of an insurance policy. We buy insurance for our cars, we buy insurance for our home, in the event of. And this is the way I see preparedness too. So that it's just in the event of, you've got these, you've got some food put away, you've got some medical supplies put away, you've got security items put away, medical, food, water. And guess what? You're going to have that stuff anyway. So as a means of even rotating those things, those go into our diet. And then, the older stuff gets rotated forward. We consume them, and then we purchase more. And a lot of times when you buy in bulk and things like that, you save money that way too. But the other point I wanted to make is that once I moved here, where I have some acreage, I turned some sustainability pieces to this into hobbies. Well, first of all, I always liked, even when I was living closer to the city, I should say, and just had my standard plot of property, I always had a tomato garden and some peppers, and I only had room for a few items and whatnot. Well, I always enjoyed gardening. So now I put in a pretty big garden, which quite honestly is a lot of work. But I grow about 8 or 10 different things. I enjoy that. And then when I realized it, I said, it would be really kind of nice if I could improve my garden. And as we know, you need pollinators for that. Pollinate the garden to get a better harvest. And so I got into beekeeping about 3 years ago. And I'm not in it for commercially, but I'm able to harvest enough honey each year in the last couple of years that I've been able to sell surplus, and I put it away. I mean, honey is one of those items that literally is almost forever. It lasts, so it's a sweetener, and we already know the benefits of raw honey. Also, I have some chickens, and I got into and I love animals. We've got cats here. We've had a dog until she passed and whatnot. But I love animals anyway. And I got chickens. And guess what? We had fresh eggs every day. The 10 chickens that I have give us about 7 or 8 eggs every day. I don't eat them. My wife and I do not eat that many eggs. I eat eggs about 2 or 3 times a week, but I'm able to even now sell raw eggs, which people are clamoring for. So I'm able to help pay for, at least subsidize some of my costs with chicken feed and things like that. And that's also a hobby. So there's preparedness shouldn't be all about doom and gloom and the end of the world. Although, we all obviously we have those thoughts. It should be about enhancing our lifestyle. Maybe, being able to even save some money on it. And so my mindset on this has really changed over the years to where I've integrated into hobbies and things I enjoy doing. For some, maybe that's not their thing, but that's just one way of looking at it also.
Yeah, and those are really good points. And I think having an enjoyment aspect of it while you're doing it is kind of important, so it doesn't just become a drudge and a bugbear. And the whole garden thing, some people have got a bit of a natural aptitude for it and others don't. But I think most people can have a go at doing it, at least a small amount, and growing a few things. And that all helps, because especially if you're growing things organically without all the sprays and so on, you're probably going to be better off in terms of the value of the food anyway, rather than what's bought off the shelves, which is often not too crash hot, filled with chemicals and so on. So there's that aspect of it. And I just want to say water is obviously the most important thing, because you can go a fair while without food, but you can't go very long at all without water. And so especially Fred, I mean, water is obviously a big issue when you're in the desert.
Yeah, it is. One of the things about buying where I bought, this particular area is challenged with water. People's wells are drying up or have dried up, and then they go and drill a well, and it's terribly expensive, and they come up with a dry well, and it's not a good thing. I happen to be, I wasn't going to buy a house unless I had a good working well. This particular well is where two streams, it's drilled right where two streams come together, two underground streams come together. And when I had a septic system put in when we moved in, it's basically a little cabin out in the desert. And they had a composting toilet, and the moment we walked in and my wife saw that, she's like, I am not setting foot in this house until there's a flushing toilet.
Yeah.
So, okay, no problem. Well, so they did that, and they're like, okay, we need to fill the tank. And it was a 15, I put a big one in just in case, you're already digging up the ground for a few hundred more. You can make it quite a bit bigger or handle a lot more. Like ours is good for a 4 or 5 bedroom house. I think that's a 1,500 gallon tank. So we had to fill it. It was a concrete tank. And so they had to fill it above the seam to make sure it didn't leak. And so he's like, okay, can you, do you think you got enough water for that? I'm like, I better. And it turned out that there was no problem. I had full pressure, the whole, I think it was like 700-800 gallons. And then when I moved in, I noticed my electric meter was like going like crazy. I'm like, okay, well, there's got to be something. And I'm like looking around. And then the guy that sold me the house, he's, oh, you know what? There might be a crack in the pipe out there in the pasture. And I'm like, okay, electric meter was just running flat out. And then, okay. And so basically my well was running flat out for well over a month or two, because it was an 1.25 inch pipe that was cracked wide open. So I'm pretty confident of my water supply is okay. The well pump's not that old, and it's a real high-end well pump. So that's probably going to be okay. But I think I might want to have a spare in case who knows what. And then I got to have electricity to pull that water out of the ground. So I'm going to have, I'm connected to the grid right now, and my goal is to go solar, which means that I need to have, I'll have an inverter to power the household, and which means I need to back up one of those. And then also I have a diesel generator that can handle the whole house as well. Water is absolutely critical. Okay, that's the number one critical thing. So I have multiple backups for extracting the water out of the ground. And then the second facet of my water plan, unfortunately, it's not in place, is rainwater collection, and we collect it off the roofs. We get about 12 inches of rain here a year, and that is a good amount to collect. I can collect, well, I'm going to have a lot more roof after I build a couple of carports, and then I'll have a lot more collection area for that. And so I'll collect probably 4,000 or 5,000 gallons a year of that. So there's, it's a multifaceted plan. And I would suggest anybody that is hearing my voice that you need to really consider your water. Oh, I live near a stream. Well, what if you get kicked out? What if you have to bug out somewhere? What if, you go through the what ifs, and do you know anybody that's got a well at their house? Do you know, do they have a generator? Do they have, all these things to supply water? The municipal water system may go down. We don't know. But if the grid goes down, I'm told that most municipal water systems, once the fuel runs out, if they have the diesel backups, the big generators and so forth, once that is exhausted, which is in like a week or two, then the water stops. And so that's super critical.
Right. Yeah, I'm kind of fortunate where I live is that water is not an issue as far as it being plentiful in the ground, of course. And I'm like you, Fred. I do have a well pump. I also have the means to, with a hand pump, to get it out of the ground if I have to get it from my well, if there is no electricity and I've run out of gasoline for my generator, and to create my own power to power it out of the ground. To pull it out of the ground. I do have the means to hand pump it out. But what I want to mention for those of you that are, once again, are not in a situation like Fred and I, and you're in the city, or, you're in an apartment, you're in a, as I said earlier, and as Fred mentioned, the threes. Literally, if you even back that up one more step, we can survive about 3 minutes without air. We can survive approximately about 3 days without water. And then, they say up to 3 weeks maybe without food. So water is critical. So the reality of water is that, yes, we need a lot of it every day. And that, of course, is multiplied exponentially by how many people are in your household. So you can only store so much. You should have some stored, readily available, potable water, whether it's in bottles and jugs or some other means. But you also should have the means to purify water, so that, as Fred mentioned, as soon as he mentioned, streams and things like that, you need to have something, maybe something like a Berkey water filter in your house. For a backpack or something, you might want to have a life straw, one for each person. There's another saying that goes, 1 is none, 2 is 1, 3 is 2. What that means is if you only have one of something and it breaks or it doesn't work or you can't find it, you have none. If you have 2 of something and then one of them breaks, at least you have 1 left. So once you get past initial purchases, then, as you go forward, you can think about redundancy, so that you have backups. But and once again, because water is so critical, I've got stored water. I do have a couple of spring heads on my property that literally, if I have to, I could go down there with 5-gallon buckets and scoop it right up out of the ground. Of course, that water is going to be, going to have some sediment in it. It's going to have, potentially bacteria, things like that. So it's going to go into those filters. So there's also the tablets. These small bottle of tablets that are water purification. And one very, very cheap method of not only purifying water, sterilizing water for drinking purposes, but also for using as a cleaner on stronger quantities, to make like bleach as a cleaner. And that's your common pool shock. Those of you that own a swimming pool, you know what that is. I believe it's, forgive me if I'm getting this, a calcium hypochlorite, and it's called pool shock. And we won't go down to that too many rabbit holes here and take up too much time. But there are methods where so many scoops of that per so many gallons of water, and you make a strong cleaner like bleach. You cut that way back, and then you turn it into a purifier for the water. So that's another method. I definitely believe in the redundancy, multiple methods of performing water purification. Just like in the food arena, Fred mentioned this too, canned foods. Well, there's short-term supplies. There's what you could call medium or long-term supplies, and then very long-term supplies. Short-term or shorter term would be canned foods, canned vegetables, canned meats, which will last long beyond their expiration dates too, by the way. And if you're near an LDS cannery, you can buy grain in bulk and put it in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers and seal those up. And you got beans, rice, or other type of items like that would be good for 10, 15, 20 years. And then of course one that is one of the most expensive items to buy, but it has the longest term, easiest to store, is freeze-dried foods. Those have come down actually, though, in price, I've noticed in recent years. And there's many brands out there now, like Mountain House and Wise Foods and some others. There's some of them that I don't remember the names, but so there's just redundancy is important, but start somewhere. Start small, and just keep in mind what you need in the short term for you and your family, and then expand from there as you are able to.
Good points. And of course, there's just little things like having plenty of batteries to keep things going.
Mm-hmm.
A wind-up radio or something that uses batteries that you have plenty of. Think about even things like solar chargers. How can you charge your batteries? If you've got rechargeable batteries, you can get little solar chargers, portable solar chargers to charge up your phones and whatnot if they're still going, and so on. So, I mean, there's so many things that we could cover, but just as we're getting towards the end, so you guys, watching what's happening with the economy, I think everybody is kind of in this complacent mode that nothing will ever fall over, because no one's really, our generation hasn't lived through the Great Depression or the Second World War or anything like that. And so I think a lot of people are just complacent about the possibilities of what could happen. But at some point, the economy is going to fall over, the global economy. It's pretty much a given. Mathematical certainty. Whether it happens tomorrow or a bit further down the track, who knows? What are your guys' thoughts on actually preparing for that?
As far as the economy goes, one is, I feel for so many people that just have a lot of debt. That is just a ball and chain around your neck, and it is just terrible. And I've had to work out. It took me a long time to get back on my feet from when I crashed in 2008. I was big into real estate, and I had a bunch of houses. And anyway, that just poof, all gone. I got sucked down this the vacuum of that. But anyway, so now I don't use credit at all, and so that's been huge. And it's really, really helpful. And if you can get to the point, just start working at it, start chipping away at instead of going to Starbucks and spending $5 for a foo-foo coffee, don't, take that $5 and plow it into your debt. And eventually it's going to be like that snowball, but it's going to start working for you instead of against you. And so that's one thing, is just get out of debt ASAP. And then number two, if you have any means, get out of the stock market very, very soon. Like tomorrow would be good, because that is, well, Tony, I think you've said something about this. It's what I call it. It's a Rothschild date of November 11th. There's several dates that people have pointed out and said that the kickoff event may happen on that day, and it'll be a huge crash or a bank holiday where they close the bank and you can't get your funds no matter what. If you're on vacation or you're traveling, I just was hacked a couple weeks ago, and I was halfway, I was 1,000 miles or 1,200 miles from my house. That's not a good thing because my truck doesn't get the best mileage, and I had to buy a lot of fuel. And fortunately, I had a different card, and it worked out okay. But what if you didn't have, what if you're somewhere and you're going to get stuck? There's a bank holiday. So with the economy as fragile as it is, and I can't believe it's still going. I'm honestly, I'm pleased. I'm thrilled because I don't really want this. Because once that kickoff event happens, and it's going to go from bad to worse, from worse to even worse, and it's just not, a lot of people say preppers just can't wait for the big one, the big crash, and then that we're going to stand on the mountain all by ourselves and go, woo, I win. Nobody wins. That's going to stink. And so
right.
If you're prepared, yeah, and so there again, there's the community part. We don't do this alone. And so if you can pull money out of the market, if you have that, I would put it into gold and silver. Right now, gold and silver is insanely low, especially considering the environment the world is in. I've watched it. I watch it every day, multiple times a day. And I used to predict, I'd play a game with myself. I didn't really have money to invest while I was watching this for the last almost 10 years. But I'd watch it go up and down, and I'd say, oh, this happened in a global sense. And I would predict, okay, copper, gold, silver, they're going to do this or that. Well, the last several years, everything seems to go opposite. Everything is kind of manipulated. Kind of is the wrong word. Everything is manipulated as far as the commodities go and the economy. And nothing really can be trusted as far as those numbers go. But if you have an ounce of gold in your hand or an ounce of silver, that's trusted. As long as it's real. That's another problem. But as long as it's real silver or real gold, that is real wealth, or that's going to protect you from losing everything. I bought Kmart stock years ago when they, it looked like they were going to turn it around. They were talking about turning around. So I jumped in, and it was like a penny stock, and they went bankrupt on me. And then they reissued another stock. It's like, well, that's kind of stinky. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that's life. That's business. But if you have that in your hand, they can't take it away from you. And so I've got a little bit of silver. And once the rocket takes off, my intention is to take that silver. Once I feel like, okay, there's still time to cash it in and buy stuff, then I'm going to buy more supplies with that gain I had on the silver. Right now, silver's like at $14.54 an ounce. That's a joke. It almost costs more than that to mine it, and it's an industrial metal that gets consumed. A lot of it is consumed in building things like cars and computers and stuff. And so as a result of that price should be way over. And then also the mints are selling out like very quickly. So if you do the math, the demand is through the roof, but yet the price is low. Okay. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
Actually, I had the conversation in a text with a friend earlier today, and he said, some people are saying it won't be too long and silver gets to the 3 figures mark. And I said, yeah, I believe that silver will get to the 3 figures mark, but I'm not in a hurry for that to happen, because if it does, we know we're in serious trouble. So the longer it stays low, the more we're out, we haven't hit that yet. So it is going to happen. And it's kind of like an insurance, but it's not like I'm certainly not willing it to happen. As far as November 11th goes, there's a significant date there with the 3 11s being November and 11 and 2018 adding up to 11. It's definitely a date I'm watching very closely, and I think we should be prepared if something does happen. But I will be the first one to go, in big relief if nothing does happen. So it's not like I'm wanting it to happen. So Gary, we're coming up towards an hour, so we better not go too much longer. But I'll get your thoughts.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I was just going to say your question basically was about world events, and I think anyone that's looking at headlines, and I mean even in alternative media, certainly articles that are posted even on our own Minute to Midnight forum on Facebook, you can see that there's trigger events everywhere. The Middle East is on fire. A lot of reports about Israel massing on the Gaza border, ready to go in. That's happened before, but they say this may have more profound effect because of what's going on in Syria and Iran and Russia and all that. We've got, once again, the economy, which has been in really, really bad shape as far as our national debt, which is just going up exponentially. The mass of this caravan of people heading for the American border, currently going through Mexico, that's going to be I'll say an interesting situation, how that's handled. I think that has a lot of America's sovereignty pins on that. We'll see where that takes us, but anything could trigger a chain event that whether it be another 9/11 or something like that, and the dominoes are going to start falling, and they will start falling fast. So we're all looking at these things. We need to pray. We need to go to the Lord. We need to make sure on a daily basis that we're right with Him. We're taking care of our families, and we're doing all those things first and foremost. And then we're in His hands ultimately.
Totally agree. So, yep. It's been a really good conversation. I hope it's got people thinking. I'm sure there'll be a lot of preppers already listening to this, and they'll know a lot of this. But, I think we can all learn something out of conversations like this. And even if what we learn out of it is just to get our acts together and do something, then it's been worth it, I think. So I want to say thank you guys for being on the show today, and it's been really good. Fred, you have a YouTube channel. You can tell people where that is. And, of course, Gary, you are part of our moderating team on the A Minute to Midnight Facebook group. You don't actually have your own channel or anything, but I want to say thank you very much for the work you're putting into our Facebook group. It's been much appreciated. So, Fred, can you perhaps just give the listeners your details again?
Sure. It's called ETPrepper, as in End Times Prepper, and E as in Edward, T as in Tom, Prepper, all one word. And that one, I do all sorts of things. One of the things we were talking about was water, and I built a distiller, and I look for that video to come. It's kind of it's a good sized distiller, water distiller. And so I build stuff and I put it up there, and I hope it helps people. And then sometimes I review products. Sometimes I talk about things that are going on. Sometimes I ask for prayer for my wife, all sorts of things on that channel. It's a helpful channel. And then I'll also put videos into the forum of the A Minute to Midnight. If you haven't gone to that website, Tony's done a great job on it. And there's a lot of information at the A Minute to Midnight website, the forum. There's a ton of information. So if you're new to prepping, go there and look at the forum, and you'll see some information there, and you might get some ideas and see some just a lot of good stuff.
And of course, we're always keen to get people's input, other people's input into that forum as well. Thanks for mentioning it. Yeah, that's at our website, aminutetomidnight.com. And we do run A Minute to Midnight by donations completely, 100% too, folks. And if you're able to help us, that'd be great. And we're a little team with Brooke, who's another part of the team, and Matt. And, yep. And so visit our website, aminutetomidnight.com, where you can find all our shows and archives and so on there, and the forum. And that's about it, really, from me. So, Gary, I'll leave you with the last thoughts.
Well, I just want to thank you, first of all, for the invite. It was wonderful to be on here. Nice talking with you too, Fred. And if anybody has any questions, they can ping me on the forum, and just make God number one, and don't get overwhelmed if you're thinking about doing this, and just take it one step at a time. God bless you all.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.